Hello and welcome to another episode of the Cult Products Podcast with me, Phil Keeney Bolland.
And me, Adam Yahya Durrant.
A lot of names between the
Yeah,
two.
A lot of names, yeah, the double barreling there. Sometimes we double barrel and sometimes we don't, I've noticed. I'm not sure what that's about.
Sometimes I remember that I have a double-barreled name and sometimes I don't.
Yes,
neither of us have always had double-barreled names, so it's a pretty recent thing. A lot of it depends on if I'm filling out a form, whether I want to write all the letters in my now very long name.
Yeah, same. Mine's legally changed and I do get into trouble when I don't say the whole thing by my wife. But
For me, in the old days when Facebook started, and then you would be in a relationship and you'd become like Facebook official. Do you remember that?
That was
For now, the equivalent was probably like changing my name on LinkedIn to show that I got married. Anyway, the podcast is about B2B tech startups, and within that, kind of brand, marketing, website, product, all of those things. Adam and I are both the co-founders of Yaya, a design agency that spent most of the last 5 or 6 years traveling around the world, helping lots of startup founders get their businesses off the ground. And today we're going to be talking a bit about websites and within that, what you need from a website as a B2B tech startup, why you need it, and how you can create it. And we're going to be getting into some of the more practical side of things in the second half of this podcast. So when we chatted about this yesterday, Adam, you said that we might end up having a few arguments on this, which could make for quite an interesting episode. But we will see how we get on. So I guess like a good place to start is probably, you're starting your B2B tech startup. Most people, I think, recognize that they need a website. Adam, where do you think people should start? What should be the sort of first things that they think about when it comes to a website?
Interesting. Well, I guess where people shouldn't start is just kind of looking at their favorite websites or things that they've kind of seen online and trying to kind of imitate that. I think it's really, again, we talk about it a lot, but it's around the strategy and the value proposition and identifying like what actual site they actually need. I think people don't really kind of understand that point. There's a lot of different kind of sites that have different, purposes in terms of, for example, what we kind of tag as a brochure site, which is just kind of a shop window of a site. It's just kind of showing that you exist, to something that's a lot more kind of, I guess, focused on lead generation and actually selling a thing. So I think understanding the objective of the website is like, the first and foremost place to start, really, because and it's surprising how many people don't know the answer to that question, and just go to kind of, I like the look of something like this. Can we do that? We'll touch upon that, I'm sure, in a bit. But I think more around like what is actually the kind of functional purpose to the site is a good starting place, not just the only place. But yeah, what about you? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I would expand on what you said and say that really what you shouldn't do is look at the Apple website and say, I want a version of that, which I mean, I've fallen into that pitfall before. I remember the first website project that I was involved in, I literally sent the Apple website over to Simon, who was the developer who was working on it, and said, I want something that's a bit like this. And he quite rightly pushed back on that. That hasn't really gone away, I think, because everybody knows that the Apple website is generally like really good and sets a lot of the kind of design standards that other people try and follow. but yeah, you have to recognize that Apple's site is designed to sell Apple products. They've made very intentional design decisions in the process of creating that site to do that thing, which may not apply to what your business does or what you're trying to sell, or the objectives of your website, to your point. And they've also spent an incredible amount of money doing it. So it is very difficult to replicate what makes that approach good for a much smaller budget, presumably with a much smaller team. So I think that specifically is not a great starting point. Would you
No,
agree?
no, I would agree. It's a phrase we say with that one, don't we? Champagne taste, lemonade budget, and that's kind of very it is very aligned to that Apple site in general, and definitely the kind of classic Apple AirPods storytelling. And I think when we've fallen down that trap previously, and we have, like, where we've tried to retrofit that kind of style of experience into something that's like a SaaS platform, it doesn't work. So really knowing what you're selling and creating the right environment and site to warrant that, I think is paramount. That works, as you say, for something that's a nice, a beautiful watch, or something that's a product, something tangible that you're kind of showing and telling a story around, but not for a kind of SaaS platform or something. So yeah, we've learned the hard way with that sometimes, but yeah, it's still we still get that request at the start of a lot of projects, for sure.
I think before we move on from the Apple site, it's probably worth just unpacking why those websites are generally effective, and why they also are expensive and time consuming, and what we can learn from that, because I think it probably gives some structure to most of what we're going to talk about today. And the first thing is Apple's brand is it's one of the most instantly recognizable. It's one of the most well established. It's one of the most effective brands in the world ever. They've put a lot of work into that. And when I say brand in that sense, I mean their messaging, their tone of voice, their look and feel, their understanding of who their audience is, the way they communicate what they do consistently, whether that's in adverts, websites, every element of their product is super consistent. Like, that is the first thing. When they create products, they they very well understand this process of creating demand for them, and in a lot of cases getting their products kind of to have this almost oversubscribed demand before they even launch. And the website is a part of that broader marketing strategy. So understanding what strategy is and what the role of the website is within that. And then they have all these beautiful photographs and videos that are like super high production values, but also they have some of the world's top creative teams thinking about what should be the content of those. So they're constantly trying to push things within their brand and bring things to life in really exciting ways. They get it wrong, and they've gotten it wrong quite recently with that smashing everything into an iPad thing that they did. But they're taking risks, and when you take risks, there's always going to be the potential for things to go wrong. And then the site user experience itself is generally speaking pretty feels quite simple and very intuitive. It's there are animations and things in there, but they serve a real purpose. It's not a particularly busy site generally. There's quite good sort of visual hierarchy, and where you have content, that content is supported by the right media to make that really impactful. And of course, it is developed and built to the kind of highest standards imaginable. So when you just look at the end result of that and say, I like the Apple site, I want something like that, you're really just looking at the tip of an iceberg, and all of those things sit beneath that. And all of those things take time, effort, and money to make happen. So when you just buy a template and you can do this because once the AirPod site or the Mac Pro site exists, people immediately copy it and rebuild it in a Webflow template or whatever it is. you're just buying the tip of the iceberg and then trying to retrofit it to your business. Because you haven't got the base of the iceberg in place, it may look like the Apple site, but it's never going to be as good or as effective as the Apple site.
Yeah, that's it. That's a really great point. I think also, just to kind of finish up on the Apple stuff, as you touched on, like, the way that they kind of use animation and use those kind of transitional effects is so well considered. And there's also different layers to that site. You get into the kind of the richer, more experience-led stuff, but then you have more of like the functional kind of elements where there's really minimal to no animation. So really, they've years and years of kind of crafting that, and a lot of investment and a lot of time to get that kind of balance right. So as you say, if you're just showing the tip of the iceberg, you're not considering all those other kind of elements that make that site so kind of good and so well designed. So yeah. I was going to ask you a question just to kind of like talk about, we're talking in around like, because a lot of people do default to looking at things and getting their inspiration from them. There's obviously a lot of inspiration and a lot of resource around more than ever, websites, Pinterest, and a lot of websites for design inspiration and to get ideas for your website, like Dribble and Awards. What's your kind of view on those things? Because obviously they have a huge impact in terms of like trends and what's kind of the latest styling in site design and brand. But what's your thoughts on that? Because we talk about this a lot, that it has quite a lot of hindrance on things as well.
Yeah. So I think the starting point for anybody who's thinking about building a website, as he said, should really be what are you trying to achieve with the website? And when you are starting a B2B tech startup, just to make this as sort of easy and uncomplicated as possible, I think that there are probably 3 different types of website that you could build. And it depends. I think the first is, and we're actually going to be joined by somebody next week. We're going to do a whole episode on this. The first thing that you should do is you should build a site that is actually designed to create a waiting list, and that is designed to test demand for your product and test your value proposition. And that should be something that you can build quickly. It should be very simple, probably a one-page site, mainly focused on lead capture and what your value proposition is. And it should be something that you can, support with advertising to drive traffic towards it, or social media, or whatever those kinds of things is. And really, you need to kind of validate the value proposition that way before you start to invest in a bigger website. You're not going to see a lot of those kinds of sites on places like Dribble and Awards, because they're not the kind of things that attract that kind of attention. They have a specific purpose. They need to be pretty simple, and actually, there's plenty of tools out there that founders can use to just go and create those things pretty easily. When you're creating something like that, really what you should be thinking about is that objective of capturing leads and building a waiting list. What's the best practice to be able to do that? What are the established design patterns? By design patterns, we mean the existing pieces of user experience and user interface design that have been proven over time using data to effectively convert people. You'll notice at no point have I mentioned going on Dribble and looking at those kinds of things. Then the sort of second and third types of sites, these are kind of the same. These are like basically your next site. So once you've proved your value proposition and you've decided that this is the idea that you're going to back, you have to bring that to life in website. And within the sort of B2B world, you've got this sort of high value, relatively lower volume SaaS platform type stuff. These are things with like quite high cost licenses that you need a sales team to negotiate with people. And then you've got the other side of this, which is like higher volume, self-serve stuff. People can buy it from a website, and let's think about things like Slack in that kind of bucket, for example. Zoom, Loom, all those types of things. You need like slightly different websites for both of those, but they both can follow pretty pre-existing design patterns, and there are nuances and there are complexities, and that's where we come in and do kind of bespoke design, where you're really kind of optimizing for the specific business that you are and your specific objectives. But there are also a load of pre-existing templates out there that follow the best practice design patterns. In reality, for most SaaS businesses, the type of site you're going to need is going to need a homepage, an about us, a contact us page, some pages on specific use cases and features, and some pages probably on the industries that you serve. For those kind of higher volume things, it's going to be more like download the app, sign up, that kind of funnel. Here are the key features, etc. Both of those things you can actually go and you can get a decent template for them, and you can kind of work with that as a base and then optimize. And if you don't have the budget to go out and hire a design agency, I'd kind of suggest that's what you do. Again, I did not at any point mention going on awards and going on Dribbble. So to answer your original question, I feel pretty strongly that looking at those kind of like whizzy things first is the wrong approach. The right approach is to understand what it is that you're trying to do, which of those 3 websites you need, and then find a template that, forgetting about the kind of aesthetic layer for a second, functionally achieves that objective really, really well. And then, and this I think is a key point, the thing that differentiates you, if everybody's using basically the same patterns and the same information architecture and all of those kinds of things, it's the brand that differentiates you, and it's the content that differentiates you on the site. So that's the stuff that you really need to think about, and how that brand lifts and differentiates, and how that content clearly connects with your audience. So if it's basically, you've got 2 options here. Either you go down the sort of Dribbble or awards route and you look at things that are like really flashy, or you do the more strategic thing. And actually, looking at the more flashy stuff is basically the same as just looking at the Apple website, and all the same inherent problems are linked to that approach.
There's also like a kind of practical element to it as well, right? Creating something flashy is expensive, and it's like massive time sap. So, we talked about this in previous pods around kind of just iterating and the kind of the hurdles of design, and that's how you think about it. The end thing might end up being something quite flashy and quite kind of innovative, but the first thing shouldn't be. It should be simple. It should be something that can be put out there quickly and then perfected over time. And there's nothing worse than just getting stuck at the first hurdle because you're trying to create the thing that's a year down the line, or so. And we've been in that situation and seen that firsthand. So it's a painful and expensive mistake to make, in our opinion.
Have you ever? Do you know any designers who post on Dribbble?
Do you know what? No, I really, really don't like Dribbble. I think there's a lot of reasons why I find it a really bad influence on design. It's the kind of the dribbleization of everything is a real thing, because it only deals a couple of things. It's very trend based, so essentially people are following trends because they know that they're popular, hence they'll get likes. So that kind of builds out a more this kind of domino effect of people just kind of copying and following suit, and this homogenization of design styles just starts building. Also, obviously, the kind of biggest one is that they're all just like snippets of UI. They're not actually practical things that are real world. So again, can sometimes be useful for inspiration, but generally speaking, they're just things that look nice but don't actually have any kind of value in terms of being functionally any good. And I think people just get led by them. I definitely feel there's an arc with things like Dribble, like, you know, Discover. Take, for example, we talked about it before, like characters and illustrations being used for SaaS platforms, like that kind of thing that happened, I guess, 10 years ago. Dribble went mad. You know, everything on Dribble, technology driven, was like illustrations based, and then it kind of goes from that to then into like graphic templates like Shutterstock, and then it just gets fully homogenized, and that's kind of how that kind of works with those kind of places.
So just to for listeners who maybe don't know, Dribble is, I guess, like kind of a social network for designers where you can
so.
post things that probably not things that you've been working on, honestly, because they tend to be, as Adam said, you know, not really linked to any specific objective or use case, but, you know, things that people, I guess, design for Dribble to get Dribble likes, and it is also, you know, and when we talk about awards, that's the sort of website, I guess, like review body that kind of says here, you know, here's the nice looking sites that are kind of bang on trend at the minute. I don't think, and a lot of people do start their kind of investigation into, you know, inspiration for websites by looking at those things. I don't think I've ever met any designer who I've worked with who's ever posted anything on Dribble, or like, at least like hasn't posted on there since they stopped being a student. And I think that in itself says something about the type of things that you'll find on there.
Definitely. It's like a student like sandbox, isn't it, for just kind of posting flashy stuff that's going to get kind of clicks and just following trends. Yeah, I think it serves a purpose, but it's just not a good place for anyone who's starting a business to look. Awards, I'd say, is a little bit more. It serves a different purpose. I think that's almost like a sandbox for engineers to see how they can push like engineering in digital design. So I think it has a place. Again, as I pointed at the start, people do get a bit too fixated on stuff there, but you can definitely see how, if you imagine like that's, you know, awards are where the concepts are, but the reality of like some of those concepts actually being a practical thing, it doesn't always marry up. But some of the things that have been kind of developed within that kind of pushing of engineering and different kind of animation styles or whatever does kind of drip into kind of modern day websites, I think. So I think it has a place. Just, as we said, just don't be suckered into the bright and shiny things.
Right.
Nice to look
I
at.
agree. I mean, yes. I think not all websites that win awards are bad websites. You know, and sometimes, you know, you've got things that are like they exist to push the boundaries of what's possible in web design and web development, and that's cool. So there are good websites on there, and there are things that are rightly recognized by awards. But using awards, like assuming that winning an award on awards means that it's a good site, is the wrong way of thinking about those things. Because actually, lots of the stuff that makes a good website, particularly in a B2B tech startup space, isn't going to win awards. You know, it's what one of our colleagues used to sort of call like brilliant basics. You know, it's things like having good information architecture, like having you know, a successful conversion strategy, having content and value propositions very clearly expressed, all of those kinds of things, which frankly are not that exciting to the judges of awards.
Yeah.
Now, I think there's a problem within design, which is that if you are a designer who's unable to articulate what information architecture means, I don't think you're a designer. I don't think you can design a good website unless you can think about the base of the iceberg, because all you end up doing is looking at places where they have, you know, these are the top 10 web trends of 2024, or awards or Dribble or wherever those kind of things is, and then just trying to replicate it because you like it as a designer and like it looks nice. And I think that becomes a sort of vicious cycle where, websites deviate more and more and more from what they actually need to do, and more towards these sort of art projects for designers who really aren't linked to the actual strategy and objectives of what the site's there to do. And then you end up with sites that don't achieve the objectives that they're there to do. And that I think is, a crying shame, because they're an integral part of your business. In some cases, they are the main source of revenue for your business. And if you've designed something that meets the 2024 website trends, but doesn't convert people, and some of these trends are kind of nonsensical. They'll be like, you'll see low contrast text, which is like hard to read. You'll see ways of styling links that means that they don't look like links. You'll have buttons that don't have enough contrast, so they're not strong calls to action. Text that's unreadable because it's scrolling and whizzing around all over the place. A million animations that are distracting from reading the content. Things that, if you step back and you don't actually focus on anything that the site's trying to do, they do look nice, but there's an element to which they actually detract from what you're trying to achieve with the website.
Well, the good news is that it is a trend, but the trend for 2025 is hyper minimalism and brutalism. So that would be a lot more, maybe coming full circle to the websites of old. Maybe websites like will just start looking like Craigslist and just be completely stripped out and just very super accessible.
Yes.
But yeah. Okay, cool. I think, go on.
Good place to stop there, I think. And when we come back, let's get into a little bit about what we mean by brutalism and where we think you should be focusing when you're building a website. Cool. Okay, welcome back. We're still talking about websites. And Adam, I wanted to kick off this section talking about Brutalist web design, which before people switch off, we're not going to get into too much of a kind of art conversation here, but I think what's interesting is this is a reaction to a lot of the websites that are out there that we've spoken about that are really busy and are really distracting. Particularly that distracting point, I think, is important, and the functional point. And an attempt to get back to what makes websites, I was going to say what makes websites great again.
Oh, gosh. Shudder.
There's a better way of phrasing that, I'm sure. But I wanted to just read to you this website, which has the guidelines for Brutalist web design on it, and get your thoughts on this. So firstly, because this is a podcast, just to describe that site to you, it's got a grey background. It's got black text on it. It all looks fairly like, I'm guessing it's Helvetica. All of the links, the text links are in that kind of blue, like generic hyperlink color, and in a serif font. So immediately, what you were saying about Craigslist, you're kind of in that kind of space. The headline is Guidelines for Brutalist Web Design, Raw Content True to Its Construction. There's a lot of text on this and very, very few images. These are the things that are in the detailed guidelines section. So number one, content is readable on all reasonable screens and devices. That I think is pretty much universally accepted as being important, pretty non-controversial. But they actually go in and say, by default, a website that uses HTML as intended and has no custom styling will be readable on all screens and devices. Only the act of design can make the content less readable, though it can certainly make it more readable. Interesting there, isn't it? Because that is true. So if you think about that generic raw HTML that looks
HTML.
like a Word document effectively. It starts off being really readable, and then you can make design choices that either enhance that or wreck it.
Yeah.
And I think what it's saying there is don't make bad decisions, basically.
Well, it's probably because more times people do, right? And that at the moment, and it's becoming an issue. So like, yeah, you can definitely see the logic there. It's interesting, isn't it?
I think
What else you
what's
got?
interesting about this is also interesting about this next point. So only hyperlinks and buttons respond to clicks. A website is a hypertext document that allows for two primary forms of interaction: navigating a link to another location and submitting information back to a server. These functions are performed respectively by hyperlinks and buttons. This is interesting. So I suppose the default again is that you don't have loads of stuff that you can click on a website, and I think what both of these things are saying is you sort of start off with an uncomplicated things and can then choose to make it more complicated, so you can add in more things to click on. Let me do the third one, and then
Go on.
we'll review this. Hyperlinks are underlined, and buttons look like buttons. Pretty pretty easy.
Yeah.
As mentioned when discussing clicks, only hyperlinks and buttons should respond to clicks, since this maintains an honest and transparent interaction with a visitor. To maintain a truth to materials, it follows that the appearance of these elements should also be honest and clear. I think you'll like this one. A hyperlink has no analog in the real world. Since the dawn of the web, convention dictates a hyperlink use an underline to reveal its existence, which is a wonderful solution since underlining has no place in modern typesetting.
Oof, punchy. Do you know?
Interesting. Okay, give me
I'd
your
like to see
thoughts.
them. Yeah. Well, I'm visualizing when you're saying that. It's kind of like, and luckily our age means that we were kind of born at the early days of the internet. But I'm seeing like in Carter 97, like going even when there wasn't any internet, and it was really like, text, because that was a CD, wasn't it? It wasn't even, and
A CD-ROM.
and a
CD-ROM. I
CD-ROM.
don't know
Does
what
anyone know
the
what that is?
ROM bit
Yeah,
means.
what is the CD-ROM? But in Carter 97, and that was very like, text. A hyperlink was a hyperlink, and a button was a button. And I think that is as much interaction that you'd have. I do think, like, this is exactly like, like the term brutalist. That was a movement born out of kind of a frustration of things, and I think this is also like showing that. And I think there's going to be some interesting stuff, because I think you're going to see a lot more stripped back websites with typography being a lot more the focus, contrast being high, and just things being a lot lighter. I think we've got kind of the internet's cluttered, and it's time to kind of basically strip it back and get it back to its kind of core essence. So I like that stuff in there. I think it's kind of funny. Like, it's like when the dawn of the internet was like that, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, and I when I read this, I was struck by a couple of different things. The first being, websites being hypertext documents is interesting. Like, if you think about it, a website is a very like extreme form of Word document. Ultimately, if you think about it, you could take Word and you could write out a bunch of stuff. You could put a bunch of images in there. You could put a bunch of videos in there, and you'd have content in a format that was very accessible and very, very readable. So that first of all is an interesting mindset, because I think we probably don't think about websites all the time as in that way. We think about them as experiences and things like that, and they ultimately become that through the design and build process, but they start off as effectively Word documents. The second thing is that the way that the internet is built, the way that websites work, is they start off being very accessible and user friendly, and become less user-friendly or more user-friendly based off the decisions that you make as a designer, which that is interesting, I think, because I would suggest that in a lot of cases they become actually less user-friendly. So that's interesting. Things like, hyperlinks are underlined and buttons look like buttons. Sounds super obvious, but I would say I've seen a diminishing amount of hyperlinks with underlines on them, because it probably doesn't look as nice. But then I also get frustrated just like, I didn't realize that was a link, or it's a subtly different color from the rest of the text, but it's not as obvious as it could be, which is kind of like bad design. Buttons, I think, you can see kind of crazy designs for buttons, but I think people generally know that that's quite bad practice and don't really do that. But even, on our own site, we had an instance where there was a button, but it was so low contrast from what it sat on, and this was actually on the contact us button on our website, that we didn't see anybody clicking on it. And we from the moment we changed it, we started to see more people click on it. And there's a mindset there which is like, well, it will look nicer if it's lower contrast and it's more subtle, but there's a functional need for it to be more high contrast. So anyway, the upshot of all this, and why I think this is important to the founders who are listening to this, I actually think the starting with a Word document and building your website out from that is a very achievable way for a founder to build a good functional website. And it's not actually the first thing I'd suggest that people do. I think that is more about the strategy and objectives and those kind of things. But if you designed a website by starting with a Word document, writing out what you want to communicate to people, and then figuring out the places within that content where you need to draw attention to something or illustrate it with richer media, and that's in line with these brutalist principles, is a better way than starting with, okay, well, we need to have lots of animations, or we need to have lots of images, and we need to have lots of headings and things that are whizzing around all over the place. And I think actually like that for a founder is, it's very doable. Most people know how to use Microsoft Word. If we talk about the design tools people should use when they're building a website as a B2B tech startup, I would suggest that isn't going to come up in a lot of conversations, but I think it should.
Yeah, I think founders are in the best place than ever really now to be able to kind of be able to do this themselves. And, I think we've almost kind of reverted back from doing content for websites within like wireframes, and you do need to do that, but it's kind of easier almost to structure the content on a piece of paper, and you can actually really kind of then have a real structure to it, rather than getting kind of distracted by the design of the site. And I think that's where we've found issues before, because you're trying to retrofit stuff to fit the design rather than the content leading the design as it should be, which is one of the biggest kind of traps you can fall in. And I think now there's so many tools and like things that we're going to touch on in a sec that can help founders build sites if they have like the content and they know what the site's objective is, and they know understand the value proposition, that it's a great time to not have design skills but be able to build websites, because that stuff is just getting like really, really powerful and really easy for people to just pick up who don't have design experiences. And Phil and I talk about this a lot, like the programs of the futures, like Figmas and Squarespaces and all this. They were originally designed for designers, like people who understand like that kind of side of thing and have worked in Adobe platforms and XYZ. they're going to all be designed just for normal people who are picking up for the first time, and that's kind of the future of these platforms. So all they're going to be doing is investing more and more in AI and things and tools that are going to only kind of support that journey, really.
I think this is a really important point, is that when we talk about this stuff today, we're talking about ways that founders can do these things. We're not talking about ways we'd expect designers to work. It is there is going to be a difference in approach based on the fact that you have that background in design, you have certain capabilities, experiences, and things that your sort of average person off the street doesn't have. But because of all those innovations, it's much more easy now for those kinds of people to do something that is really to a very high standard. And I think the more that we can frame that conversation around things that people are already familiar with, I mentioned Microsoft Word. The other thing I'd say is that Microsoft PowerPoint or Google Slides or whatever people use, a website in a sense is quite similar to creating a great presentation. So if you start in a slide design environment, you start thinking about the slide design, or more likely, you start with the template that the product gives you and then start trying to fill in the boxes. If you start with a piece of paper and you start to storyboard out your presentation and your narrative and the content that you need to bring that narrative to life, or you do that in Word or whatever, before you move it into PowerPoint, you're going to actually end up probably with a stronger narrative and content that's more effective. So I think when we think about, let's get into this. How would we actually create a website as a founder, and what tools make that possible? I think first off, very clearly define the objective of what the site is and where it sits within the strategy of your business, the marketing strategy in particular of the business. And once you have that, putting some KPIs against that, I think, is a good idea. If you're saying it's got to contribute to revenue, but be specific, is that it's got to convert a certain number of leads? Is it about when you're having sales conversations, it's you can have a sense that they've been on the website, whatever those kind of things are. Like linking those back to the objectives before you start actually designing, I think is a good space to be in. Once you have that, the other thing that you need is actually brand and clarity on what your value proposition is. And the reason that's so important is, we mentioned this in the first half. A lot of people are going to end up with basically the same website structure, especially if you follow this process that we're about to articulate. And the things that will make it successful, they are you able to communicate what you do in a way that's compelling to your market and get them interested? And does the actual brand design of the site look professional? Does it convey the meaning that you want to get across? Does it make you look like a real company? Does it make it look like that you've considered those things? Is it appealing to your target market? And Adam, we often get asked, can you help? We need a new website. And I suppose it's kind of obvious to us looking at it that yes, some sites are just bad. They're just badly organized. They've ignored all the kind of rules and patterns and things, and they've ended up in a place where they're basically unusable. Most of the time, that isn't the issue. Most of the time, the issue is that the content on the site is too long and doesn't make sense, and there is no brand, or there's a very generic, off-the-shelf brand that means that the website doesn't really convey any sense of meaning, or isn't really effective. And that actually the way to get the website to a place where it functions well and it's better than where it is and make a step change requires you to go back and actually either evolve or totally rebrand.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of our kind of biggest things, isn't it? And one that people don't really fully kind of understand. But it's sometimes we know, like, we can create probably a nicer website that's more robust and is easier for them to use as a user. But essentially, we can't really make that kind of step change that they're looking for, and you can't do that unless you have those kind of the ingredients of the brand really kind of cemented and then kind of communicated through the next website. So a lot of the time it's kind of a bit of a tricky conversation, really, because they're looking for a website update, but actually what they need is a bit more fundamental, and they need the foundations of the value proposition and the brand to be kind of reworked. So yeah, it's something that we come across all the time, really. So, and I think also what you were saying about the process that we're talking about and enabling founders to set up their own, create their own templates essentially, is great, because it gives people that kind of ownership and they can do stuff relatively quickly. You don't have to invest in design agencies to do that. But essentially there's going to be that those templates are all going to look the same. And not to kind of just beat the same point again, but that is where the content and the brand really needs to come through to stand out. So I guess essentially what we're saying is these are great tools, you should use them, but bear in mind that, like, what you're saying is really important, and how you're saying it and communicating it is also extremely important to stand out.
Mm-hmm. And the reason that they all look the same, there's good reasons for that. We're in the later stages of design, especially website, both mobile and desktop design, and we've got years and years of data on what works. So when you'd be redesigning the wheel essentially if you said, look, we're going to do something that's completely different. The type of information we're going to have is going to be very esoteric. We're going to have these crazy experiences, even down to granular things like buttons. Like, buttons look like buttons because everybody knows what a button is. They know what they know what it signifies. They know what affordances it has. All that kind of stuff. Like, if you click on a button, you know what's going to happen. That isn't going to change massively until the format that these things appear on changes, and we get into more, potentially spatial metaversy stuff, or AI, obviously, that have very, very different ways of interacting with information and technology that might not involve any sort of screen at all, or those kinds of things. Until that happens, we're going to be operating where we're making marginal gains on the design side of things, but the biggest impact comes from content and brand. And I think if you start a startup, what a lot of people do is I don't know if it's like logos.com or what, but you can kind of like muddle something together for either a very, very low cost that probably has like a logo, some colors, and like a bit of type, and kind of call that a brand, or you can just go and like pull something off the shelf and customize it. That is like, that has a purpose, but it's not really. It's really obvious when you look at a website where that's all they've done around brand, because it's very, very surface level, and it can look very generic. And there are lots of tropes that a lot of startups share, that are particularly apparent on a website. There's a level of depth below that you have to go to genuinely differentiate. And just to put that in kind of obvious terms, if you're just going to the same marketplace as everyone else is and getting the same brand as everyone else, that isn't differentiation. That is literally just buying into the the crowd. And when the structure of the site is going to rightly need to be quite similar to what everyone else is doing, that approach of non-differentiation around brand doesn't work.
No.
Okay, so we've sort of covered the first two steps, I think, in the process of creating a website. You've got your objectives, you've got some KPIs, and we've got numerous other podcasts where we're talking about brand and value propositions and things like that. Those are they're the fundamental sort of strategic elements behind the website, which really dictate what it ends up looking like. We're going to take a break there, and in the next episode we're going to talk about how you actually bring that to life and what some of the tools are. Adam and I have been playing around with some of the kind of latest AI tools. We've got a full review of those things, so stick around to get more into the practical side of things. But until then, you can find us and download our AI prototyping toolkit at cultproducts.yaya.co. Please like and subscribe to this podcast if you've enjoyed it, and share it with your friends if you think they'd be interested as well. And I think that's it for us this week. I think we're done.
Yeah.
So thanks very much, Adam.
Thanks, Phil.
Great chatting to you as always.
You too.
And we will see you all next week.
See you guys.